Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about history. In this video, I'm going to show you how the Democratic Party has adopted the tactics of the Taliban. 20 years ago, the New York Times lamented the Taliban destroying monuments and artifacts which they found offensive. The Taliban destroyed giant carvings made into a cliff. And now, 20 years later, the New York Times has called for the destruction of carvings in a cliff which they find offensive. The New York Times has determined that the four men carved into Mount Rushmore are evil. These men created liberty and hope for hundreds of millions of people around the world. And this guy over here on the right fought a civil war to end slavery. But the New York Times finds these carvings offensive and they want them gone. And now Bloomberg wants another carving on a cliff removed because they find it offensive. It's a carving of Stonewall Jackson, a Confederate general, and they say that it should be removed because he was on the side of slavery. After all, why couldn't he be a good general who fought for the Union side like General Custer? Besides being famous for his oppression of Native Americans, General Custer was a hero of the Union Army. And then there were the Native Americans themselves whom General Custer oppressed. Native Americans were some of the biggest slaveholders in the United States. The Choctaw chief Greenwood LaFleur had 15,000 acres of Mississippi land where he had 400 enslaved Africans under his dominion. And chief of the Cherokees, John Ross, was also a big advocate of slavery. And besides being major participants in slavery, Native Americans were also big on human sacrifice and sometimes cannibalism. So I wonder why the New York Times and Bloomberg aren't calling for the Aztec pyramids to be torn down. Tens of thousands of human sacrifices were made by Native Americans in Central America. It's much easier for the New York Times and Bloomberg to pick on people who are dead than to deal with the actual slave problem in the world today. There is slave trading over much of the world outside of the United States. Much of the slave trading going on in the world today is in Africa, where most of the slaves which were sold to the United States 150 years ago were sold from. And there's a lot of slave trading in the Middle East, where the World Cup Stadium in Qatar is currently being built by slaves. So instead of dealing with the actual slavery problems in the world today, the New York Times has chosen Taliban-style virtue signaling. And meanwhile, back in Democratic-controlled cities in the United States, hundreds and hundreds of black people are being shot and killed by gangs. But the Democrats are perfectly happy with this. 60 years of Democratic policies have created a living hell, which they believe keeps blacks voting for them every 4 years in the election. Democrats have created a class of what's essentially voting slaves in their inner cities. 50 years ago, Malcolm X described the problem very succinctly. The white liberal is the worst enemy to America and the worst enemy to the black man. If the Negro wasn't taken, tricked, and deceived by the white liberal, the Negroes would get together and solve our own problems. In America, the history of the white liberal has been nothing but a series of trickery designed to make Negroes think that the white liberal was going to solve our problems. But the real thing that's going on here is Democrats are creating one more smokescreen. There's lots of information coming out now about incredible corruption involving Joe Biden and the Obama administration. Democrats, of course, don't want people talking about that or even hearing about it, so they keep creating noise about completely irrelevant issues, and Democrats are modeling their behavior after the Taliban. Toto thinks their behavior is incredibly transparent and corrupt, and he's going to keep calling them out on it. You can visit Toto on the web at RealClimateScience.com.